Third, for the church, history can help us become wiser about situations we face here and now. And here what I'm saying is going to echo Steve to a large extent. History helps us get perspective on our time and place. It might help us become a little wiser and discerning about how we should conduct our witness here and now. It's a great gift of experience gathered from many places and from long periods of time. The sort of extra experience that we can put to use. We want to understand how things might go when this or that thing happens to us. If we rely only on our own immediate experience or the small network of people that we're in conversation with, we're going to have much less to draw on. And there is plenty for us to ponder and to draw upon. Just for example, Christianity is experiencing some really shrill attacks these days. Up here in the North Atlantic world, we see the attacks of Christopher Hitchens, for example, the literary lion who writes for The Atlantic, or the scientist Richard Dawkins and the philosopher Daniel Dennett. Elsewhere in the world, attacks come too. In India, there are accusations of Christians buying converts. In China, accusations of Christianity being a foreign religion and subversive to the social and political order. In Africa, accusations of Christianity being the psycho-spiritual dimension of colonialism, colonizing African minds with false consciousness. But Christianity has been attacked before. Many of these kinds of objections came in the 2nd century already. The early theologians of the church made answer in the realm of ideas, just as ordinary believers made answer with their actions. These are resources we can appropriate if we know the history. This is not to say that our ancestors had all the right answers. Surely they made mistakes, but those can be instructive too if we know about them and ponder them. So perspective and breadth of experience, humility, depth of spiritual identity, and fellowship. These three things history gives to the global church. So besides Peanuts, one of my favorite quotes about the value of history comes from C.S. Lewis, the former atheist, Oxford and Cambridge professor, an adult convert to the faith, who became one of the 20th century's greatest advocates for it. But you've heard Steve quote Lewis already, so I'll end here.
Thanks to all of you for these wonderful comments. When Marianne and I had talked on the phone about a week ago, we were concerned that there would be a lot of repetition. Actually, I think each of the papers has been quite different, except for that one quote. And I almost used that, Joel, but I knew somebody else would, so I decided not to. But that is a great quote from that essay. I do want to say a couple of things before I go to my topic, which is history and the liberal arts. It is a great privilege to be back at Westmont for this time, to be part of Rick's inaugural festivities, and it's been very exciting to be here. Two comments I want to make before I go to my topic. Marianne, you were making some lightness of the fact that you had all these people up here who were doing purgatorial time in administration, but actually a great topic for this panel would have been history and administration, because there are a lot of ways in which I don't think it's an accident that a number of us end up there. History is great preparation for dealing with the messiness and complexity and ambiguity of a lot of the things that are part of our lives as administrators, and also the particularity of each situation that you encounter and the particularity of each person. So when people say to me now, well, you don't get to do history, I mean, not in the same way that I did for many years, and I must say I miss that a great deal, but I'm thankful every day for the gift of history to the work I'm doing right now. And my other preliminary comment, which I can't resist making, because this room here, Porter Hall rather, is one of my favorite places on the Westmont campus. And this is where I first came many years ago when I first arrived at Westmont. Actually, the room looks much better than it does now, and not just because it's dark. It actually looks a lot better than it did in those days. But this room always brings back to me the very special love of teaching World Civ, which I want to return to at the end. A lot of more recent faculty didn't like using this room for World Civ, but I, for some reason, loved it. It maybe spoke to the perversity I had of meeting students in here who didn't think they wanted to be taking World Civ, and that wrestling that you referred to earlier of working with them. And in this regard, I have to mention one of the people who's in the audience today, Dr. Paul Wilt, sitting here in the front row, and it's impossible to think of history at Westmont without Dr. Wilt, who I believe has came to Westmont first in 1957. Paul, do I have that right? 58? 58. Okay, sorry, I didn't get the date right there, but 58. And one of the things that many of you might not know is Dr. Wilt is actually the person that brought Rick Poynter to Westmont. And so it's very appropriate that we acknowledge Dr. Wilt today as the person without whom, from a human standpoint, we would not have Rick Poynter with us to honor. Rick actually came here first to do a sabbatical replacement for Dr. Wilt when he was gone for a semester, and I guess really liked it so well that when Paul invited him back several years later, he was willing to come. So, Paul, it's just great to have you here. We all owe you a great debt at Westmont, and again, in particular, for bringing us Rick Poynter that we were able to honor today. So thanks so much. And now to my topic, history and the liberal arts. Long before I had heard of the liberal arts or knew that the liberal arts philosophy of education was not a political agenda, contrary to what some people may think, but a strategy for liberating human beings to be fully the people God created them to be, I absorbed the conviction that remembering, or remembering well, was a powerful aspect of becoming and staying free. The ceremonies of the World War Cenotaph in our little town of Woodstock, New Brunswick, every November 11th, and this day was known in Canada as Remembrance Day, always assumed that remembering faithfully the sacrifices of Canadian young people at Ypres, Passchendaele, Dieppe, and Normandy would keep us grateful and vigilant for our political freedom. The stories my father told very often, so often that I can repeat them, of growing up poor in economic terms. I think he earned his first money at 6, catching fish for the local mink farmer to feed to his minks. And we've heard that story many times. I think he got a penny per 6 fish or something like that. But his stories about growing up poor in economic terms, but very rich in books, music, beauty, nature, and community, showed me at a very young age that remembering faithfully could keep someone free from false expectations, from the lure of consumer culture. And then finally, my parents' frequent admonition to us as teenagers to remember who you are today challenged me to see that remembering faithfully was a critical aspect of integrity, freeing me from the tyranny of peer pressure and the temptations of instant gratification. I grew up then knowing that remembering mattered for living freely. That what I carried with me in my mind about the past would shape the way that I lived in the present and would largely determine the range of possibilities I imagined for the future. And this was all before I knew anything about Carl Becker and his essay, Every Man His Own Historian. In what was initially Becker's inaugural lecture as the 1935 president of the American Historical Association, Professor Becker was doing several things in his essay. First, he was exploring why the humanities, and history in particular, did not seem to, quote, advance knowledge in the same way that the natural sciences supposedly did. Second, he was, implicitly at least, reflecting on the epistemological limitations of a discipline that relied for most of its evidence on sources that were partial and incomplete at best, always perspectival, and rarely intended originally to speak to the questions that historians put to them. I sometimes think of the historian's task as something like cross-examining a witness. The witness was part of a different crime, but you are addressing him, trying to get insights into the crime that you're supposed to be prosecuting at this particular moment. So certainly Becker is about that kind of thing. Even the final narrative accounts that emerge are constructed by historians with their own partial and perspectival seeing. Not entirely an auspicious basis on which to build an academic discipline. And I think one of the themes that each of us has referred to today is really the humility that history forces on any of us who wrestle deeply with the past.